filmmaker came to see me. She had just come back from Bosnia, told the story of a 13-year-old boy whose legs had been blown to smithereens by a rifle grenade, and they were going to have to amputate his legs because there was no sophisticated medical equipment. Could we help? So we put up a picture of this kid, told his story, and set off a global synapse of Mennonite missionaries, Elks clubs, social workers in Croatia, and finally a town in Pennsylvania adopted the boy, flew him and his father to Pennsylvania. Local hospital gave him 7 rounds of surgery. They took him down to Gettysburg to show him what a civil war looks like 100 years after it's over, and then sent him back to Bosnia with his legs intact, able to play soccer. And that's still something that's missing from most news media on the internet. People have keyboards, people can make a difference, people can participate. Instead, it's still kind of old school in that people just expect you to read the story like you would out of a newspaper. Still doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
So the future of using technology in journalism is still really up in the air. Where do you see technology's role in journalism of the future, since it's such a in flux right now?
It's really a mixed blessing because, for one thing, doing investigative research, everything's now available at your fingertips. So to go back and search campaign contribution records to find out if a politician has a conflict of interest, to go back and look at court decisions, to go back and see how the media looked at a story once upon a time, to do that kind of digging now is ridiculously simple. Things that would have taken weeks, if not months, to pursue as a paper chase through county halls of justice or libraries now happens in an instant. The downside is that with so much media out there, people are overwhelmed. The audiences for all media are going down, and so you've got cutbacks in newspapers, TV stations, radio stations, and they aren't the central news gathering eyes and ears of the world that they once were 10, 20, 30 years ago, back in the days when there were 3 networks and 3 nightly newscasts.
So you think that the gatekeepers have possibly been overwhelmed by just the breadth of information out there, and maybe the focus has gotten off a little bit?
I think that the public has been overwhelmed by the breadth of information that's out there. And it's a familiar thesis going around these days, but the notion that you can now wrap yourself in media that reflects your political or point of view, your life philosophy, and you don't have to listen to anybody else, shuts off a certain number of people from a much broader exposure that you would get when a Walter Cronkite would sit down and tell you what the day's news was, or at least these were important things that you ought to watch. Now that everybody gets a chance to pick and choose, are they going to choose what Reuters is covering out of the Gulf oil spill, or are they going to read Perez Hilton? It's a toss-up.
So do you think that that is a phenomenon that is exclusive to Los Angeles, where the movie industry is here, Hollywood is here? I heard one former soldier talking about how when he was in the Middle East, Paris Hilton getting a DUI was on television, and they were there fighting a war. He said it made him feel pretty left out. And do you think that that's something exclusive to Los Angeles?
The fact that our entertainment industry overwhelms our news industry?
Right, yes.
I think it's always been there, and I think when you go back and look at old newspapers from the 20s and 30s, when you look at how the press agents tried to keep the stars out of the news when they screw up, back in the old studio days, there has always been this. And the fact that Los Angeles never had the political wherewithal that you would get in Washington, D.C. The clout wasn't there. LA didn't have the economic clout that Wall Street had. Always played a sort of tertiary role in terms of priorities. So we did what we did best, and that is, entertain the people with a lot of showbiz. Now that LA is the 2nd biggest city, now that our economic clout is huge, though we're still a little light on politics, we're still known, I think, more around the world as an entertainment capital than a news capital.
So we may have huge economic clout now, more so than we did in the past, but we have outsourcing of our investigative journalism. Yeah. We have the Los Angeles Times, which was at one time a huge publication.
1 million subscribers.
What do you think about the future of those types of publications, like the LA Times and the role that investigative journalism is going to have with not enough money to pay the people to do it.
What those news entities have, and their core value, is their brand name. And so the Los Angeles Times is known around the world. So's KNX, so's KABC. How do they compete in an era of shrinking resources? Well, they've got to branch out, and they've got to use all the multimedia resources that are out there. You see the Los Angeles Times doing a fairly good job of this. There are more Twitter accounts at the Los Angeles Times than reporters almost. You can tune in to follow any particular reporter, any particular department, get instant news as it breaks. Their website has transitioned to becoming kind of a here's what's happening now. Their LA Now section is far more brisk than even a daily newspaper could have produced years ago. But the problem is, how do you mount an investigative special in 140 characters or less? That's the problem. And where the Los Angeles Times would once run big cannon blast investigative pieces on page one, you don't see it much anymore. Not in a paper that's physically smaller, and not in a paper that has lost thousands of column inches of editorial content every week. So it's changing. You have to be able to still keep that brand name alive by pulling off some big investigative reports that are meaningful, that get national clout, national exposure, and really serve the market. But it's harder and harder to do when you've got half the editorial staff that you had 10 years ago.
If you had to go back to, excuse me, when you got out of high school, you were already into journalism in Illinois.
Right.
And you were to come to journalism school now, you're graduating, what would your view about your future in journalism be?
I would think of myself, well, when I came through journalism school and I went to the University of Missouri, a renowned J school, which at that point in time was very suspect of electronic journalism. They were old school print. They're people that come out of Time magazine and the New York Times and the Washington Post. And TV was something that was fairly suspect. That's how far my career has broadened. Today, it's all about being a multimedia reporter, being the backpack reporter, being able to tweet from a scene, being able to roll video, being able to upload stories instantly. It's not that you produce for radio, TV, or print anymore, it's that you produce for all of them. And I think anybody who comes out of J school right now has to be prepared to deal with a multimedia world. And we're seeing it right now. It's a big radio station in Los Angeles is going through contract renegotiations, AFTRA and its main corporation. And they're demanding that all their reporters carry cameras. This is a little big bridge to cross for a lot of old school journalists who aren't quite used to dealing in a multimedia world, but it's inevitable.
So where do you see the role of a medium like radio? Where does it fit in? Because you can't drive along the highway and be punching up CNN on your laptop. You can't be looking at your dashboard. Radio is basically the medium on the go. Do you see it having a future?
Yeah, because it still has a lot of the aspects that are web friendly and are the same kind of things that have accelerated the growth of the web. Portability, for one. You can listen to it anywhere. You can have a transistor radio. You can listen to it on your iPhone. So it's ubiquitous. Trouble is, its competition are things like cell phones. Because while you're driving to work, instead of listening to the radio and catching up on what's going on, you may be listening to your iPod plugged into your dashboard, or you may be yakking away on your cell phone and miss it entirely. So it's got its own challenges. Music radio will be hit far harder because there are so many more music sources. But the thing that radio or any medium has to remember is that it ought to lead local. And that if you really want to be relevant in a world where there is a zillion points of view on what's happening with the oil spill in the Gulf, for example, you still have to be able to serve your market and tell people what's happening around them, and do it in depth, and do it with integrity, and do it with a sense of backstory, a sense of institutional memory that you know this town, here's what's going down, and here's why.